All right, we can be seated. Your next witness?
Your Honor, at this point, the people call Elaine Hall to the stand.
Okay, Ms. Hall, come on up. And raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay. Sit down, and you got to talk a lot louder than that. Thank you.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
You may.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
If you want to make yourself comfortable, and you can pull your chair closer to the microphone or the microphone closer to you. Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Can you please state your full name, spelling your last name for the record?
Elaine Susan Hall, Hall.
Good morning, Ms. Hall. Where do you currently live?
In Monument, Colorado,
With whom do you live?
with my husband, Mike,
What's your husband's full name?
Michael Lee Hall.
How long have you been married to Michael Hall?
We got married in 2015,
How long have you lived in Monument?
since 2012.
Where'd you live before that?
We lived for maybe 2 months in Colorado Springs on Artistic, and before then I lived in the Durango area, in between Bayfield and Durango.
So when did you move from Durango up to Colorado Springs?
August, I think it was August of 2012.
You mentioned the artistic area. What are you referring to?
That was a house that we rented, because we were remodeling our house on Monument. So we rented that house, which is where Dylan met Joe and Kristen and those friends, is in that area.
You mentioned Dylan. Can you tell the jury who Dylan is in relation to?
Dylan, was my youngest son. He was 13.
How many kids have you had, Ms. Hall?
I have 2 boys,
What's your other boy's name?
Corey.
Was Corey born?
Corey was born in November of 91, in February of 99.
Where were they each born?
Corey was born in Denver, Colorado, and Dylan was born in Denver, Colorado.
Where were you living at the time of Dylan's birth?
In Denver, Colorado.
And how old was Dylan when he was murdered?
He was 13.
Spend a couple minutes telling the jury about Dylan, okay?
You heard a lot yesterday from all of his friends, and it's all true. Dylan was sweet. He was funny. He was charismatic. He was very empathetic. He really cared about people and their feelings. Very sweet boy.
Okay, Ms. Hall. There's tissues to the left if you need them. You have water with you. And if at any point you need a break, of course, the court would allow us to take a break, okay? Where was Dylan raised?
He was raised between Denver and Durango. He was, I think he was 4 or 5 when we moved from Denver to Durango.
And in his, I wouldn't say early teen years, but I'll say from 11, 12, 13, what kind of things did Dylan like to do on a regular basis?
He loved video games, of course. He loved sports, baseball, football, any kind of sport. He was very enthusiastic about anything he tried to do. When he played baseball, the coach had to tell me that Dylan had to play his spot because he played the entire field. So he was on it.
Where was Dylan living in September, October, and November of 2012?
We were transitioning from the Artistic House into the Monument House in Colorado Springs area.
Say we, who are you referring to?
My husband, myself, my son. My husband has 2 kids, and Dylan.
Your husband being Mr. Hall?
Yes.
And what school was Dylan going to in the fall of 2012?
Monument Middle School.
What grade was he in?
He was in 8th.
And how would you describe Dylan's hours of sleep, generally?
He was a night owl, like me. during school hours, I tried to have a bedtime, but as he got older, obviously we needed to compromise. So during school, he would generally go to sleep around 10, and then when there was no school or on the weekends, I kind of let him stay up until he was ready to go to bed. Those hours kind of varied.
How about Dylan's TV watching? Did he watch TV a lot?
More than watching TV, he played the video games. So when he was on the TV, it was primarily on the video games.
About phone use. Did Dylan have a cell phone?
He did.
And how frequently would he use his phone from your interactions and experiences?
He used it quite often. When he got one, I think it was very liberating to him, and he used it.
Jury's also heard some testimony about an iPod. Tell the jury about that.
Yes, we bought him an iPod for Christmas, and he used that quite often as well. I never knew how it worked, so it was difficult for me, but he was pretty good about explaining it to me, and because he knew that these devices had to have my permission, like any apps or anything that he would download. So I paid attention to that, but he used both frequently.
When you say you weren't sure how the iPod worked, what specifically are you referring to?
I don't know how you can text on it. I don't know how you can, I really don't understand. I thought it was just for music. So apparently there's a lot more that you can do with one.
How about social media use? What were you aware of Dylan doing with regards to social media?
I let him get a Facebook account. I believe it was in 2010, I think. And at first he was on it more often. And as he got older, it wasn't as big of a deal as it was obviously when he first got on it. But he did use social media, Facebook primarily.
For his cell phone and iPod, did he also have charges for those devices?
Yes.
So in the fall of 2012, he's in 8th grade.
Yes.
Touched on this briefly. Who were some of the friends that he was spending a lot of time with at that point in his life?
Well, he had a couple of friends from Monument, but he was really close to Joe and Kristen and Adam even after we had moved. Because it's about, I don't know, sometimes a half hour from Monument to where we lived. It depends on, obviously, traffic. But, like on the weekends, he would go down to Joe and Kristen and Adam's houses down in there. They all lived really close together.
That was actually my next question.
Oh.
The place you lived in the artistic neighborhood, where was that located in relation to Joe Ceballos, Kristen Baird, and Adam Park?
Kristen and Adam were right across the street, and Joe was like 2 houses down on the same side.
So even after you moved to Monument, which you described as a half hour away or so, is that right?
Yeah.
Dylan would spend a lot of time with those 3 friends.
Yes.
I'm going to turn now to November of 2012. When was the last time you saw your son, Dylan?
When I put him on the plane to go to Durango, so November 18th.
And where were you specifically? What airport?
Colorado Springs Airport.
Tell the jury about that moment.
Dylan was supposed to fly out on the 17th of November, but there was some problem with the plane. So they rescheduled him to board on November 18th. And so we went to the airport, and I got one of those passes that you can do with minors. And we went and had some lunch at the airport, and then I took him to the gate. He had I think he's switching planes in Denver, so we just discussed, text me when you get to Denver and let me know that you get on the plane okay. And then I hugged him.
So he's flying out of Colorado Springs.
Yes.
Approximately what time of day was the flight leaving?
It's like mid-afternoon, I believe.
You mentioned the flight was gonna go first to Denver
Yes,
and then ultimately to Durango.
yes.
You mentioned a pass that you can get for minors. For those that don't know what you're referring to, what is that and what did it allow you to do?
It's a guardian pass, if you will, and it just allows me to go back to Dillon's gate, because normally you have to be a ticketed passenger to get back in the, area, the security area. And so I had to get one of those so that I could see him off.
And you mentioned hugging Dylan. Where did that happen within the airport?
As he was boarding his plane, he was walking away, and he always called me Mutti, which is German for mom. And, I said, "Oh, you're too old to give your mom a hug," and he came back and gave me a hug.
Where was, where was he going?
Ultimately, his destination was Durango,
Visit him.
to visit his father, Mark.
See Mark Redwine in the courtroom here today.
Yes.
Point to him identifying an article of clothing that he's wearing for the record.
He's wearing a blue shirt and gray suit.
Subject to cross-examination, identifying the defendant.
Record can reflect the defendants again been identified.
Dylan wants to go.
You know, people ask me that question. It's a hard question to answer. He got bored up in Vicedo. He was often there alone, and he wanted to see his friends in Bayfield. I mean, that was really important to him.
Was there a reason he had to go?
It was a court order.
We're going to talk about that in a couple minutes, okay? How often had he visited there during the fall of 2012?
I believe they went on Mark and Dylan went on a trip in August. And then I think that was the year he also came down over Labor Day. I can't remember if it was that year or the year before. But that was it, those two times.
And the trip that you mentioned in August, where was that trip to?
To Boston, and they went somewhere else, but I can't remember where. But I know they went to Boston.
And then perhaps Labor Day of 2012, Dylan, to your recollection, may have come down to the Durango area to visit the defendant.
Yes.
And how often in the 2 years prior to November of 2012 had Dylan come down to the Durango area to visit his father?
Not often. Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
And I'll ask it a different way. During that year, 2012, how often did Dylan come down to the Vicedo, Bayfield area to visit his father?
Not often. I mean, we were still living in Durango in 2012 until August, so between January and August, or maybe it was July, actually. I don't know, it's fuzzy, but I don't believe he went to Vicedo anytime in 2012 between January and when we moved.
And who was Dylan living with during that time in 2012 primarily?
He was living with me and Corey.
Where were you and Corey living during 2012 before the move up to the Springs area?
In a house that I had purchased on Windmill Drive.
Where is Windmill Drive located?
It is in between, it's on County Road, off County Road 223, and it's between Durango and Bayfield.
I'm going to switch gears slightly here, Ms. Hall, if that's okay. Were you aware that the defendant had a fire at his house in Vicedo at some point a year or two earlier?
I had heard about it from the boys, yes.
And you're aware that remodeling or renovation was being done to put the house back in the state where they could live in it?
Yes, I mean, I was aware.
Prior to the visit pursuant to the court order, had Dylan ever come back from a visit to his father's house in Vicedo with any cuts or injuries of any kind?
Not that I can recall.
And during those visits, did Dylan ever walk off and leave the defendant, to your knowledge?
No, not that I know of, no.
How about hitchhiking? Jury's heard some testimony about hitchhiking. Do you know anything about the times or time that Dylan ever hitchhiked?
No,
Recall anything about that?
no.
Now, this case has been pending for quite some time.
It has.
Do you recall speaking with investigators at different points throughout the case?
Oh, yes, I mean, many different times.
At one moment, Your Honor.
You may.
With regards to the hitchhiking question I asked, do you think it would refresh your recollection if I were able to show you a report regarding an interview that you gave to investigators back in March of 2013?
Yeah, I mean, sure.
With court's permission, I'd like to approach and show the witness discovery page 413.
No objection.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. Mhm.
Ms. Hall, does that refresh your recollection as to a conversation you had in March of 2013 with one of the investigators who at that point was investigating the disappearance of your son?
Yes.
With regards to hitchhiking, what do you recall telling her, if anything?
Well, I remember speaking about the whole hitchhiking incident, and I've always had a fear of having a missing child because I watch the news and stuff. It's heart-wrenching. And I always told both of my boys, you know, never get in a vehicle with someone you don't know. And I hammered that into their head quite often. So when I found out about this hitchhiking incident, you know, it didn't make sense to me that Dylan would stick out his thumb, you know, and take a ride with somebody. And then after I had conversations with the boys, you know, they told me that it was really snowing hard, they were freezing, and it was, they were sitting in the back of the truck, they weren't in the cab of the truck. And he was with his friends. So it's not like he was standing on a highway with his thumb out by himself, you know, he was with his friends and they were freezing.
That's the one time that you're aware of that Dylan ever hitchhiked.
Yes,
That's what you explained to the investigators back in March of 2013.
yeah.
Sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the same hitchhiking experience that Ryan Nava talked about when he testified.
Yes.
So, your son Corey, how old is Corey now?
Corey is 29,
What was the age difference between Corey and Dylan?
8 years.
What was their relationship like from your perspective?
We were very close. You know, Corey, he was 8 years older than Dylan, so he really helped me a lot, because I was basically a single mother, and I was working full-time as well. And so Corey would get Dylan to school, get himself to school. He was kind of my cab, if you will, with Dylan, make sure he got to his baseball games and everything if I couldn't be there due to work.
What were you doing for work, in those years?
I was the director of financial aid at Fort Lewis College.
How long did you do that for?
At that school or in general?
I was starting with that school.
I was there for 9 years.
How about in general?
In general, I started my career when I was 19 as a work study in the financial aid office, and I just kept doing that line of work.
I want to back up and have you talk with the jury about how the November trip came about.
Okay,
Take you through a number of questions.
okay.
The jury's hearing evidence regarding the murder of your son, Bill.
Objection, that's not a question. Objection to the form of the question. Objection to the term murder.
I'm gonna sustain the use of that term for the trial.
The jury's hearing evidence about an incident involving your son, Dylan. I'm going to focus on, in these questions I'm going to ask you, the family dynamics to set the context for that, okay?
Okay.
So obviously you could share a lot more, but I'm going to focus on the events that bring us here. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
How long were you married to the defendant for?
We got married in 1991, and I believe our divorce was final in, 2007.
And after the divorce was finalized, how was child custody handled in those first few years?
I can't remember specifically what the court order said, but, Mark was over the road, so he was not in town very often. And I was okay with him having Dylan whenever he wanted to see Dylan. I let Corey make up his own mind because at that time Corey was 20 years old, and, you know, his relationship with Mark could be what they wanted it to be. But if I'm not mistaken, I think Dylan was supposed to see him every weekend. I can't really remember what the custody rules were at that time.
And then moving forward, when you're moving to Colorado Springs, did you go through proceedings with the court to determine who would have primary custody?
We did that after, because I had to vacate my house on Windmill, because at that time, Mark had, I let Mark have the house, because we were just going back and forth in the settlement dispute. So we had to move out of our house on Windmill that the boys had basically been raised in. And at that time, I decided that I would just move down to Colorado Springs because my mom was not doing very well, and she lived in Florence.
When was that?
It was like in July or August of 2012.
July or August of 2012, you're about to start making the move to the Colorado Springs area.
Yes,
And do you go back to the court?
we did. We went back in September.
With regards to those September court proceedings, was custody decided in September of 2012?
Yes,
Court here from Dylan as part of the proceedings leading to the court's order.
yes.
Based on the court's review, who was awarded primary custody of Dylan?
I was.
By primary custody, what did that mean in that case?
That Dylan would reside with me and go to school in the area that I was living in, and then obviously have visitation with his father.
To your knowledge, was Dylan living with you Dylan's preference as well?
Yes,
And that's what was ordered by the court.
yes.
The Thanksgiving holiday, how did that come about during those proceedings?
That was a court order that he go to Durango for Thanksgiving. And so he did. Well, I put him on a plane.
In the lead up to that trip, were you engaging in emails with the defendant about the arrangements for that trip?
I was. I can't recall specifically what we were saying, but I know that there were emails, from Mark letting me know the plane information and stuff like that.
You may.
Ms. Hall, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as exhibit number 8 for identification and it's been shown to council. Take a moment to look over that exhibit, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions about it, okay?
Okay?
Do you
Okay.
recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
It's emails from Mark and I about Dylan's travel to Durango.
What dates are on the emails?
It starts on Sunday, November 11th, and then it ends November 18th.
Recall those communications between you and the defendant during that time?
Yes,
And do you recognize the email addresses that were being used by you and the defendant at that time?
yes,
Your Honor, at this time, and does it fairly and accurately represent the email exchanges between you and the defendant during that time period?
yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the people remove people's statements and evidence.
Any objection?
I respectfully object under relevance as to portions of Exhibit 8. I believe they address ancillary issues in the separation and divorce that are more prejudicial than probative and distracting to the jury.
Any response?
Your Honor, it's part of the email exchange between Ms. Hall and the defendant setting up the trip for Dylan Redwine to come to Durango in November of 2012. It's a relatively short email exchange, and I think it's key for the jury to see how the trip came about, what the communications were around this and stuff.
Okay. I'm going to allow it in. I understand what Mr. Bogan's talking about. I think the jury can understand that sometimes divorced people don't get along and issues arise, and we'll go from there. So it's admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, I'm going to put People's 8 up on the screen behind you. You can either look at the screen if you like, or the document in front of you. The email that we're going to focus on first is actually on the second page of Exhibit 8. So what is this email?
This is an email from Mark to me about Dylan's flight itinerary
For what trip?
for the Thanksgiving trip.
2012.
Yes,
And you see on the from line, whose name?
from Mark Redwine.
To line is you.
Yes,
Who's on the CC line?
Dana at Durango Family Law.
Familiar with who that is?
No.
The judge just mentioned sometimes divorced individuals have difficult relationships. Paraphrase.
That's fine.
Fair to say you and the defendant had at times a very contentious divorce.
Yes,
So this is, the individual on the CC line is not someone that you're familiar with, as you said.
no.
Email is sent on November 11th at 8:42 p.m.
Yes.
Read the email aloud, please.
By now, you should have received Dylan's flight itinerary. As you know, Dylan has failed to respond to all my communication attempts. Sorry. So I will have to rely on you to inform him of his travel. Also, since you have failed to address any support issues, you may have, I expect all his needs are being addressed. So all the monies in his personal account are not needed. XXX. Sent from Dylan's iPad.
Be sent from Dylan's iPad. We're going to talk about, in a couple minutes, we're going to talk about how this email is provided to law enforcement, okay? Says by now you should have received Dylan's flight itinerary. What is that regarding?
What is that, what?
What was that about?
Gosh, I don't remember specifically, but I assume it's for the November 2012, flight to Durango over Thanksgiving break.
You know, Dylan has failed to respond to all my communication attempts. So I'll have to rely on you to inform him of his travel. What is that regarding?
I guess Dylan wasn't communicating with Mark the way Mark wanted Dylan to communicate with him. I mean, I really always got a lot of grief from Mark about Dylan not communicating with Mark.
On occasion, had you prompted or pushed Dylan to communicate?
I did. I mean, I said, you know, I'm hearing from your dad that you're not responding. And he would basically say, you know, there's just really nothing to say.
Also, since you failed to address any support issues you may have, I expect all his needs are being addressed. All the monies in his personal account are not needed. What was that about?
Objection, relevance.
You're gonna have to explain the relevance, so come on up. I don't understand that either. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, we'll wait till you get ready. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, I have overruled the objection, but I do want to give you an instruction that this evidence about what was in Dylan's personal account should not be used by you for any purpose other than seeing what was going on with Dylan's personal account that was set up by his parents. The fact that these two, Mr. and at that time Ms. Redwine, were having arguments and disagreements about the divorce, that's a common thing. You should not use any of those disagreements to think that Mr. Redwine had bad character, was a bad person, and therefore did bad things. This is specifically limited to what went on with the money in Dylan's account. So go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. So as the court just explained, Ms. Hall, we're focusing just on, as the defendant puts it, his personal account, Dylan's personal account, not the years of child support or divorce litigation, contentious divorce. We're just focused on what's relevant to this case. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So all the monies in his personal account are not needed. What is his personal account regarding?
It was an account that Mark had actually set up for Dylan so that he would have, like, walking around money, I guess. I mean, I wasn't privy or a part of that account being set up.
You have access to that account?
No.
I'm going to move up here to your response to this email from the defendant. November 11th, 2012 at 9:51 p.m. So this is just later in the evening on the same day. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you read to the jury what you respond to the defendant?
I am aware and have told Dylan, I hope he will be able to do something while he's there, as he's not real thrilled about the idea of sitting around your house. I am working on getting the paperwork in for support, but the money in his account is for him, I thought, and not support. Feel free to send money to help support him, though. That would be great.
So I'm aware and I have told Dylan that with regards to the flight arrangements.
Yes.
I hope you'll be able to do something while he's there, as he's not real thrilled about the idea of sitting around your house. What prompted you to say that?
That was one of Dylan's biggest complaints, is when he would go to Vicedo. It's very remote where Mark lived. He didn't have any friends within walking distance of Mark's house. And so they would basically just sit in Mark's house, and Dylan would be incredibly bored.
For this November 2012 trip, you were under the impression that Dylan did not want to go to his father's house?
Yes.
Objection, foundation.
I'm going to explain how she knows that.
How'd you know that?
Dylan told me?
And did you talk about it at length with Dylan?
Yes.
Based on those conversations with Dylan, what did you do to check to see if Dylan actually had to go on the trip?
I contacted my attorney at the time and asked if there was anything we could do. And she basically said it was a court order and I would be in violation of the court and that we would have to work on this in the future.
Who was your attorney at the time?
Amber Harrison?
Harrison told you that due to the court order, Dylan had to go visit with his father for Thanksgiving holiday.
Yes.
What prompted you to reach out to Ms. Harrison to check on that?
Because Dylan was pretty adamant that he wanted to be with us at Thanksgiving, especially since his Oma, which is my mother, was diagnosed with cancer. And he wanted to spend that Thanksgiving with my side of the family and with her.
What was the nature of your son Corey's relationship with the defendant around that same time?
Relevance, objection.
I can see that it's relevant. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Hall.
In November of 2012. Gosh, I don't believe they had a pretty tumultuous relationship, so it's hard for me to remember when they were talking and when they were not, but I don't think at that time they were on good terms.
You're aware that Corey will be testifying in this trial as well?
Yes.
Then skipping ahead, well, The next sentence talks briefly about the child support, so I'll move past that. Then you say, but the money in his account is for him. What do you mean by that?
Well, when Mark said, since I have failed to address support issues, and that the monies in his personal account are not needed, I didn't look at the money in his personal account as child support. I looked at it as an account for Dylan that Mark had set up so that Dylan could have some money. So I was baffled at that, statement.
And who, to your knowledge, had access to that personal account that you're referring to?
I think Mark. I don't think Dylan was ever able to get into that account.
What do you mean by that?
He always got,
And this objection, this calls for speculation. She preceded her answer, with, I think, and now she's
I think it may be a foundational objection.
foundation as well.
Be more likely to grant, so if you can lay a foundation for that, that's fine.
Thank you, Alex. Were you aware of the circumstances around the personal account for Dylan being set up? In other words, were you aware Dylan had a personal account?
Dylan had told me yes.
And during that conversation with Dylan, did you learn how Dylan would have access?
Dylan told me that his dad had set up an account, and Dylan had a card, but Dylan could never, either the PIN number was wrong or he could never access the funds in that account, and he was frustrated by it.
By a card, what are you referring to?
Like an ATM card?
And frustrated about what?
The fact that he could never access the funds in that account because he thought those funds were set up for him to use.
Move ahead in Exhibit 8 here. That response you sent to the defendant was on November 11th, 2012. You then get a response from him on November 18th regarding different addresses to send a check, child support. We're going to move ahead here. November 18th, 2012. There's an email here where you talk about where best things should be sent. That was November 18th, 12:44. What do you say to the defendant in that email?
Starting with the per your request or starting with the yes, Dylan is checked in?
Dylan is checked
This is on November 18th at 12:44. Dylan is checked in and will arrive in Durango at 5:13. Please let me know that you will be there. We are moving to Monument now, but send anything to Florence. Please do not send anything or contact my place of employment, as it put my last job in jeopardy.
Okay, I want you to stop there, okay? That's something that the jury should not consider at all. So that's part of, what we talked about, where they had a divorce, they weren't getting along. That happens, but that can't be used in any manner, to make Mr. Redwine look like a bad person. So go ahead. So my limiting instruction, I think I just talked about Ms. Hall's testimony, but it also applies to Exhibit 8. So, go ahead.
Thank you. And how does the defendant respond at 2:14 p.m. on Sunday, November 8th?
Yes, of course, I will be there. I am very much looking forward to seeing the little guy.
During that same time period, were you also texting with the defendant?
And I can't recall.
You may.
I ask you to take a moment and look over Exhibit 6. And I'm going to ask you a number of questions.
So the top page is the starting point, or the bottom page is the starting point?
Top page, starting point.
Thank you.
Hall, I just need you to look at, the date and the phone numbers, and then I think I can ask you some questions and go from there.
Okay, so you don't want me to read all this?
You can, but I think we might be able to.
Oh, okay.
Who's this text exchange between?
Mark and I,
How do you recognize it to be a text exchange between you and the defendant?
the telephone numbers and just the general conversation.
You recall the substance of that conversation being the conversation you had with the defendant via text during that same time period?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
All having that conversation with the defendant during that same time period, text.
Vaguely,
Recognize the phone numbers on the text messages.
yes.
And whose phone numbers are those?
Mark's, on all these texts there, it just shows his number.
And you're the one responding to those text messages from him?
Yes.
At this time, people move people 6 into evidence.
Any objection?
Your Honor, I object to portions of page 6, or, of Exhibit 6. Specifically, I have grave concerns about the third comment on page 3. I have grave concerns about the first green comment on page 4 and the second to last green comment on page 4. I believe that these are comments by the witness regarding her theories, her ideas of what's going on, her opinions of what's going on, and obviously the jurors are the ultimate arbiter of what transpired as the fact finders. And I think this is far more prejudicial than probative.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes, Your Honor. These were provided to counsel previously, of course. This is a back and forth exchange that's taking place between Ms. Hall and the defendant, and specifically regards to counsel's concerns regarding the disappearance of their son. It captures Ms. Hall's reaction, her present sense impression, and is necessary for the jury to understand the context of the other communications between the two of them contained in Exhibit 6.
And Your Honor, it's not a hearsay objection. Thank you. It's more prejudicial than probative and relevance objection. So even it might be a present sense impression, I still don't think it passes muster under the other analysis.
All right. Excuse me. I'm going to allow, admit Exhibit 6. The jury is instructed that whatever Ms. Hall thought happened is what Ms. Hall thought happened. And this is your job to determine what happened here. So I don't want you to be swayed by anything that one person says or one person thinks. You're to look at the facts and the law that I give it to you and then make the determination. Go ahead, Mr. Doherty.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Also want to state that since this was provided earlier, we're a little dilatory to be doing this during trial. So go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. So it's in. Thanks. Ms. Hall, Exhibit 6 is now in evidence, which means I can fill in the screen and ask questions of you, okay?
Okay.
So we have here on the right a text that appears in a green bubble. Who's the person sending this text?
That is me.
And throughout the Exhibit 6, you're the one in the green bubbles?
Yes, that appears to be correct.
And who's responding in the blue text box?
That would be Mark.
So we're going to go through this together. Are you more comfortable reading it from the document in front of you or looking at the screen?
The document in front of me?
So can you read to the jury the first text message?
Dylan's flight got canceled today from Springs to Denver. There's a flight tomorrow leaving Springs at 1:44, getting to Durango at 5:13, so I'll book that one. Dylan tried calling, but you didn't answer.
What's the date and time on that text message you sent to the defendant?
11/17/2012.
Just backing up a step, can I ask you a couple questions about that?
Sure.
want to talk to you and just get the jury oriented to the travel arrangements here. So it seems to be indicating that Dylan was supposed to fly out on the 17th.
Yes.
What happened with that?
The flight was canceled, I believe I think it was airplane issues.
How'd you find out about that?
I went to the airport, and they said the flight has been canceled.
Which airport did you go to?
Colorado Springs Airport.
And where did you and who'd you go with?
Dylan and I went to the airport. It was just Dylan and I.
Then we have the next text box there. What are you saying to the defendant in this one?
I texted you, and Dylan tried calling you. His flight was canceled, as I'm sure you knew, as the attendant told me they sent a message to your email. His flight was rescheduled for tomorrow. You should have told me it was canceled. This is Elaine, and you know that.
What is that about?
When I moved from Durango to Colorado Springs area, I took Corey's phone number, because Corey was on his own and got his own phone plan and everything. So because Corey's phone was under my plan, I just took his phone number and moved it over to me. And Mark had always...
Can you stop you there for one
Yes.
second? So this is you saying, this is me, Elaine.
Yes.
And how about the part about, I'm sure you knew, as the attendant told me they sent a message to your email. What's that about?
Well, just that when we showed up at the airport to get Dylan on the airplane, the gal told me that the flight was canceled and it was sent to Mark's email, and she gave me the email address.
You were unaware of that when you went to the airport on November 17th.
Yes.
So what is the plan after the flight's canceled on November 17th?
A new flight the next day was booked.
What did Dylan do the night of November 17th into November 8th?
He stayed with his friends, Joe, Adam, and Kristen, on Artistic. He hung out with them.
Whose house did he stay at?
Joe's grandfather's house?
It was the night of November 17th into November 8th.
Yes.
When did you next see Dylan?
On November 18th,
Where'd you see him?
I went to Joe's grandfather's house, and then we still had some stuff in our artistic house, so we stopped by there, and then we left
Go to where?
to go to the airport.
Go to the airport on November 18th for the rescheduled flight.
Yes.
What was Dylan bringing to the airport for the trip to Durango?
I can't remember specifically, but I know he had a backpack with his phone, his iPod, his chargers for both. He had, I believe, a hoodie, and then his clothes and his personal things. I mean, he was 13, so he was grown up enough to pack his own bag.
How'd you know what he had with him?
Because we had discussed it. I specifically talked about the cell phones and the charger. And Dylan, regardless of what type of weather, he wore shorts. He was always hot, and so he wore shorts. And I specifically asked him if he had pants, at least one pair of pants in his backpack.
Ron, may I approach them?
You may.
Ms. Hall, I'm showing you what's been previously admitted into evidence of people's 1, 2, and 3. Can you take a look at those, please?
I've seen those a million times.
What are those?
They're pictures of Dylan on November, I believe these were taken November 17th, 2012, with his friend Adam and Joe.
And you heard Ms. Baird testify yesterday.
Yes.
What clothes are Dylan wearing in those photographs?
He's wearing his shorts and a I can't really see. I think this is his box shirt, and then his Blue Devils hat.
And were those the same clothes he was wearing when you picked him up on November 18th, 2012?
I cannot recall.
When you look at those photographs, you see any injuries, sores, or cuts to his face or lips?
No,
And when you picked him up on November 18th, 2012, to go to the airport, you see any injuries, cuts, or sores on his face at all?
no.
During this same time period, would you, on occasion, text with Dylan, your son?
Yes.
Yes.
Paul, I'm showing you what's been previously marked and provided to council. It's marked as People's Exhibit 7 for identification.
Okay.
You recognize who these text messages are?
Myself and Dylan?
Recognize the phone numbers on those text messages?
Yes.
And do those text messages accurately reflect the text communications between you and Dylan during that time period?
Yes.
And at this time, people move People 7 into evidence.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
7's admitted.
Court's permission, Ms. Hall, I'm going to put this on the screen. Who do we have in the blue text box here?
That's Dylan.
Green text box is,
Me.
so can you read the first text from Dylan to you, please?
I'm on the plane to Durango,
Date of that text?
November 18th, 2012.
Time there says 16:28, which is military time, excuse me. So if you subtract 12 hours, it's 4:28 p.m. I'm on the plane to Durango. What was the significance of that text message? In other words, what did that mean? Where was Dylan in his course of travel that day?
I think that's when he landed in Denver and went to the other plane in Denver to get on the plane to Durango.
And how do you respond at 4:36 p.m.?
Oh, good. You did well, son. Proud of you. I love you, and thanks for keeping in touch so well. You're a flying pro.
And at 5:21 p.m., what do you text your son, Dylan?
You land in Durango, son?
So the abbreviation DGO is for Durango.
Yes.
We have a response from Dylan on the screen at 5:49 p.m. What does Dylan say?
Just did.
To ask you, the B3 temp face with the stash, what is that?
I have no idea what that is. I don't know.
Probably a good thing. Okay. So then you respond to Dylan. He sends you the text at 5:49. You respond at 5:51, and what do you say?
Oh, good. I was worried. You're very late, but glad you're safe. Make your dad wait, LOL.
Exactly.
Well, that I was glad he was in Durango, and you know, I was hoping that Mark was actually at the airplane rather than Dylan having to wait on Mark. Mark could wait on Dylan.
Dylan responds at 5:51 p.m. and says what?
Yeah, after all of our waiting.
Send another text to Dylan at 7:03 p.m. on November 8th.
Your dad get you, son?
7:06 on November 18th, has Dylan respond?
Yes, with the frowny face.
What was the frowny face regarding?
Objection, the exhibit speaks for itself, more prejudicial than probative. This issue's already been spoken to.
I'm on your side so far. I mean, doesn't it just, I think people can figure out what that means.
Can I rephrase the question?
Well, we'll see, go ahead.
Was the frowny face consistent with your prior discussions with Dylan about this trip?
Asked and answered, same objection.
I think that's okay.
Yes.
You respond to Dylan 6 minutes later at 7:12 p.m. What do you say?
I miss you already, but try and have fun.
Next text to Dylan that same evening, November 18th, 2012, at 10:09 p.m. What do you text Dylan at that point?
How's it going, son? You okay?
Dylan again.
No.
Last communication you had with Dylan was the yes with the frowny face.
Yes.
Send another text. 12:07 p.m., so it's 7 minutes after noon on November 19th. And what do you say?
How's it going, son? You okay?
All right, Ms. Hall, I know this is, I can only imagine how hard this is. I'm really sorry.
Thank you.
Time, would you need
I'm okay.
the 10:09 text from the night before? You say, how's it going, son? You okay? Do you hear back from Dylan that night?
No.
Hear back from Dylan ever again?
No.
Go to that next text message the next day, 12:07 p.m., November 19th. Do you see that text message in that exhibit?
Yes.
Mr. Doherty, I'm gonna make you stand in front of the lectern, please. Sure. So we could pick you up on the microphone.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
Or speak up, would work too.
Thank you, Your Honor, sorry. What do you say in that text message on November 19th at 12:07 p.m.?
How you doing, son? I miss you.
The final text message in this exhibit is a text message that you send at 2:35 a.m. on November 20th. What do you say in that text message, Ms. Hall?
Sorry.
Your time.
I said, Dylan, please be safe. Mom is here to come get you, son.
What had taken place between the text message you sent during the day on November 19th at 12:07 p.m.?
Mark had texted me and asked me if I had seen Dylan.
And later that day, night, into the early morning hours, 2:35 a.m., you send the Dylan, please be safe, Mama's here, come get you son.
Yes, when I found out that, Mark hadn't seen Dylan, I was getting off of work, so I drove to Monument and I packed a quick bag and I left to go to Durango.
Where were you working at the time?
Colorado College in Colorado Springs.
What was your job there, Ms. Hall?
I was the Associate Director of Financial Aid.
Where were you when you received the text from the defendant asking if you knew where Dylan might be?
I was in my car driving home.
So was that the first point at which you realized Dylan might be missing?
Yes.
What was your reaction, Ms. Hall?
I apologize for interrupting. If this exhibit isn't in play anymore, I'd ask that it not be published to the jury on the screen right now.
You need any more?
No, we can take it down.
Okay, please do.
What was your reaction?
I was frantic. It was nerve-wracking. I was 6 hours away, and he's asking me if I've seen Dylan.
What'd you do at that point?
Drove home, and I called my son Corey on my way home, and I said, Mark can't find Dylan. And then when I got home, I told my husband, Mark can't find Dylan, and I packed a bag and I got in my car. And I don't think my husband thought it was a serious matter, because he, at first he was just like, oh, you're just being dramatic.
Judge, I believe this is hearsay and a little bit of narrative, so I'm objecting to this portion of the question, or answer.
I'm gonna sustain that unless you have reason to let it in.
Fine, Your Honor, thank you. Did you pack some bags and get ready to head to Durango?
I packed a bag, yes.
And who were you going to go to Durango with?
I was going to go by myself, but then my husband and Corey came with me.
Around what time did you leave from the Colorado Springs area to head to Durango?
I can't recall the exact time, but it must have been probably around 5:30 p.m.
I'm going to go back, of course, permission, and put number 6 back on the screen. So we're going to pick up where we left off a little bit earlier in the day on November 18th, 2012. These are texts between you and the defendant, and I'd like to direct your attention, Ms. Hall, to a text you send at 5:44 p.m. So it says 17:44, but again, that's military time, so it's 5:44 p.m. What do you text to the defendant at that time?
These don't have the time thing. I can't see the time thing, so I'm not sure.
So the time, and we could use the screen if you like, and the times appear both on the paper document but also on the screen in the right-hand corner. If you like,
Okay, I see this one now, yes. Okay. So, is the, can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. 5:44 p.m. So the 17:44. You see that one?
44, yes. Did you get Dylan okay?
What does the defendant say in response at 5:45?
Nope, didn't show up.
What do you say then at 5:45 in return?
Is the plane delayed? Well, I said, is the plan delayed? And then I sent another text saying plane.
What does the defendant respond to you at 5:46 on November 8th?
Don't have flight info, waiting to hear from him.
Say what at 5:47?
OMG, just go in the airport and ask.
That's at 5:47 on November 18th, right? And after that, you then hear from Dylan that he's landed, and you know then that he's in Durango.
Yes,
Next text that you receive from the defendant, is that the one that notifies you that Dylan is missing?
yes.
Text is November 19th at 4:32 p.m. Do you see it there? It says November 19th, 16:32, or 4:32 p.m.
Yes, but I will say, on this sheet, those are blocked out, so it's hard for me to see the times, but yes.
I approach a moment.
Yes.
Other stars or whatever there. Gotcha.
When you do, of course, permission is asked you to step down.
Okay.
That's fine. Please use the microphone so we get your sound picked up. And again, it's the mute button on there that turns it on if it's off.
I approach again, Your Honor.
It's on. Yes. Okay. It's on. I heard you.
So the defendant sends you a text at 4:32 in the afternoon on November 19th, 2012. Do you see that?
It was on.
Yes.
And what does that text message from the defendant tell you?
Elaine, I'm wondering if you have heard from Dylan. I've been trying to reach him all afternoon.
Ms. Hall, what do you say in response at 4:37 p.m.?
It's really worrying when I'm 7 hours away and get a message like this from you. I haven't heard from Dylan today. Where did you leave him or last see him?
The defendant responds at 4:39 p.m. and says what, Ms. Hall?
I went to town for errands and he was fine. I am just concerned and thought you may have heard from him.
How do you respond to that text at 4:42 p.m.?
Was he at the Viacito house? I'm concerned as well, as will. Please let me know when you find him.
How does the defendant respond at 4:44 p.m.?
Yes, at the lake, and I will.
What do you say at 4:47 in that text message to the defendant?
It's weird that he would just up and leave. Does he have his phone?
The defendant responds at 4:50 p.m. And what does he say to you at that point?
I agree, which is why I'm asking if you have heard from him. I assume he does, and why I have sent him texts and calls. What I don't know is if he has a charger or if it's charged.
And that message is sent at 4:50 p.m.
Yes,
And you were aware that Dylan had his chargers with him.
yes.
Now, you send a message at 4:51 p.m. on November 19th, and what do you say?
I am terribly freaked out that he's roaming around in the dark. I think we should call the police.
How does the defendant respond at 4:55?
I didn't want to freak you out, as I'm sure he's fine, but don't think I am not concerned. I just left the Bayfield Marshal's office and headed back to the house.
And at 4:55, you send a text message to the defendant?
Yes. Want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Did you get into a fight with him or something?
And at 4:57, you send another text saying what?
How long has he been missing?
What does the defendant say at 4:57 on November 19th?
No, we talked and everything is fine.
And at 4:58,
Several hours.
and that looks like it's in response to how long has he been missing?
Yes.
What do you say at 4:58 p.m.?
Well, it's not fine. He's missing.
And at 5:40 p.m., so this is about 42 minutes later, you text the defendant, and what do you say?
Have you heard anything from Dylan? You said you called the marshal's office. They have no record of you calling them. I called them.
What do you mean by that?
Just that when I called the marshal's office, they didn't have a report or anything on Dylan being missing, or they really didn't know anything.
What prompted you to call law enforcement?
Because Mark couldn't find Dylan, and I needed some help.
In addition to calling the marshal's office, what other steps did you take to contact law enforcement?
I can't recall specifically. I mean, we were driving at the time. I know I made a number of calls to the marshal's office. And then when we got into town, we went directly to the marshal's office.
You may.
Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to take a look at the Mark 4 identification.
Got me a standard.
Take down the screen. You mentioned that you yourself called the police, called the marshal's office, And that's what prompted that text that you sent to the defendant that you just read.
Yes.
What is Exhibit 4 there?
It says call to dispatch, and then it's got 3/10/20 and my initials.
And on March 10th of 2020, those initials signify that you listened to that and verified it was a recording of the same call.
Yes.
And did that recording fairly accurately, in effect, exactly capture the call that you made back on November 19th, 2012?
Honestly, I don't remember specifically what, the call, but I'm sure that if I, initialed it, then I heard it, and yes.
So I know this is a weird process, and it's very strange. We have to go through this formula to get things admitted into evidence. So I know it sounds weird, so I recognize that. When I ask you these questions, it means when you listen to the recording, was that your voice on the recording?
Yes.
And did you recognize it to be your voice calling dispatch in
Yes.
response to your son going missing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to ask that People's 4 be admitted into evidence.
Foundation, cumulative, she's testified as to the call she made to dispatch already.
Foundation's a little weak, but I think it's okay. I don't think it's cumulative, I think it's all right. So it's admitted?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Sorry, dispatch. I got you again. Hi, my name is Elaine Redwine, and my son Dylan Redwine was visiting his dad up in Durango. I live in Colorado Springs, and his dad texted me a little while ago and said he could not find Dylan. Okay, he's 13 years old. Okay, do you know the address of the dad? 2343 County Road 500, it's up in Vicedo. Okay. So 2343 County Road 500 in Vicedo. Yes, and his dad said he called the marshal's office. I don't know if that's true or not. Let me see here. Let me see if this has been taken yet. He didn't. Okay. We don't have a record of it. What is your name? I'm sorry. What's your last name? Redwine. Redwine. And your first name again? Elaine. Elaine. And your phone number? 970-903-6843. 903-6843? Yeah. Okay. And his name is Dylan Redwine? My son's name is Dylan Redwine, yeah. Okay. And his father's name is Mark Redwine. Is it how do you spell his first name? D-Y-L-A-N. What's his middle name? Nicholas, Nicholas. Okay. And what's his birthday? 0206-1999. 0206-99? Yes. Okay. Does he have any idea where he may have gone? Not according to him, no. Dylan doesn't have friends with him by Vicedo. He's got friends in Bayfield. Okay. They're calling when I get home, but. And when was the last time he saw him? He texted me, he said a couple hours ago, so.
Where were you when you made the call to dispatch?
In my car,
Where were you driving?
to Durango. I should say to Bayfield. I mean, I put Durango and Bayfield together all the time, but I was driving to Bayfield.
We're going to go back to Exhibit 6 on the screen. So you had texted the defendant at 5:40 p.m. If you heard anything from Dylan, you said you called the marshal's office. They have no record of you calling them. I called them. Is that the call that we just listened to?
Yes.
6:23 p.m., you send another text to the defendant. What does this one say? Call?
Tell me that again?
Sure, I'm sorry. 6:23, so it's 18:23. Why don't we have you come off the stand?
Okay.
So on on the bottom right of the screen there, it says 1823, November 19th. You sent a text to the defendant. What does that text say?
Have you heard from him?
29, the defendant responds. What does the defendant say?
No, and I am extremely concerned at this point. I just left Tristan's house, and he has not seen him. Waiting for the sheriff to call back. I am doing all.
Okay, we'll scroll down in a minute, but who, to your knowledge, was Tristan?
Tristan was a classmate of Dylan's that lived up in Bicito.
So this text message indicates from the defendant, I just left Tristan's house and he has not seen
Yes.
629, the text continues.
And he says, I can and will let you know the moment I hear from him.
What do you say in response, 635, ma'am?
He wouldn't just leave, he would have called me. I am so suspect of you right now. How could he just disappear?
And what do you mean when you say he wouldn't just leave, he would have called me?
Objection, speculation, the exhibit speaks for itself, going back to the court's prior curative instruction to the jury regarding these issues and this exhibit.
I think this is fine, this part.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Hall. He wouldn't just, it's okay, I'm sorry. He wouldn't just leave, he would have called me. What do you mean by that?
Just as it says, he was very good about letting me know what he was doing, either by calling me or by text. And there were numerous occasions where, you know, he was up in Bicito and, you know, would call or text me, you know, to come get him. So I didn't think this was any different, this trip or this time.
So it's suspect to you that he's now gone missing and you haven't heard.
Yes.
What does the defendant say in response at 544?
It's just like you to blame me. Right now, the best thing for him is finding him.
The defendant sends another text to you at 7:08. This is about 25 minutes later. And what does he say in that text message?
I just spoke with the deputy. His fishing pole is missing, and the deputy is on his way up. He asked that I search the property, which I will do now. I know
And it goes on to say what?
this is difficult, but we gotta believe he is okay.
And then you send a text at 8:44 that evening. And at this point, you still haven't heard from, and no one has seen Dylan, right?
Correct.
So what do you say at 8:44 p.m.?
Obviously, I had some typos, but I said, when was the last time you talked to him?
What does the defendant say in response at 8:46 p.m.?
This morning?
8:48 p.m., you send another text to the defendant saying what, Ms. Hall?
Are you looking for him? What are you doing to find him? You seem so nonchalant that our kid is missing.
And then at 9:02 p.m. that same night, November 19th, what do you text to the defendant?
You talked to him on his cell this morning or when you left the house? Did you talk to him at all today on his cell phone?
What does the defendant say at 9:05 p.m.?
I personally spoke with this morning. The sheriff is here now. I'm doing all that I can.
I personally spoke with this morning. Looks like he's missing a M there.
Yes.
The sheriff is here now. I'm doing all that I can. I'm doing all that I can. At 9,
Is there a question there? Or is counsel just going to read the exhibit? If so, I object to that process.
I agree with you, so please ask questions.
so 9:05 p.m. he sends the text saying what?
They're here and have advised me you are on your way. There are canine units on the way. And following up on a friend I am not familiar with.
And that's at 9:43 p.m. Sorry.
Yes.
10:51 p.m. you send a response to the defendant. What do you say in that text message, Ms. Hall?
Any news? What's this friend's name?
You can have a seat, ma'am. So we've looked at some text messages that you were exchanging with the defendant. Were you calling anyone from the car and during the course of the evening?
Yes.
Who else were you making calls to?
I was making calls to people, that I've known, friends in Durango, because I had to figure out where we were gonna stay.
And during that evening and through the night, did you try calling Dylan?
Yes, incessantly. I called him many, many times.
What would happen when you would call Dylan?
It would go to voicemail.
Leave voicemails for him?
Yes.
Do you ever connect with him?
No.
How about individuals from the sheriff's office? Did you continue to call them throughout the night too?
I believe so. You know, that was kind of a chaotic night. It's, looking back, it's so surreal, but I believe I did call the sheriff's office while we were driving.
And what time approximately did you arrive in the Bayfield, Durango area, Ms. Hall?
Oh, it was late. It was maybe 2:30 in the morning, I think.
Where'd you go when you arrived?
Straight to the marshal's office in Bayfield.
What was the
Mr.
reason?
Doherty, would this be a good place? I want to take another break because I don't want to go too long with the jury but if you've got a good place in a few minutes, that'd be fine too.
I think this works perfect, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's take another break since we took one so early. We'll start up again at 10 after. Everybody rise for the jury, please. Okay, and Aaron reminded me that we do have to stop a couple minutes before noon, so just keep that in your mind.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, so 10 after.
Thank you, Your Honor.